Shelley and David Notek. Shelley Notek was born in 1954 in Raymond, Washington, the oldest of 3 siblings. Her childhood was marked by abandonment and instability when her mother Sharon left the family. Sharon struggled with her own issues and died when Shelley was just 13 years old. Strangely, Shelley showed no grief at her mother's passing, a detail that would later seem significant. Living with her father Les Watson and stepmother Laura Stallings, Shelley displayed troubling behaviors from an early age. She tormented her younger brothers, blaming them for mishaps and even placing glass in their shoes. At 14, she made false accusations against her father that led to her placement in juvenile detention and mandatory therapy. During therapy, she refused to take any accountability for her actions. This pattern of manipulation and cruelty would persist throughout her life. David Notek was a Navy veteran and construction worker when he met Shelley in 1982. They married in 1987. David was described as weak-willed, someone who enabled Shelley's behavior because he feared losing his family. Together, they would create a household of unimaginable suffering. The Noteks appeared to be generous people who took in vulnerable individuals who needed help. But behind closed doors, they subjected their house guests to prolonged torture and degradation. Their victims were people without strong family connections, people who would not be immediately missed if they disappeared. Kathy Loreno came to stay with the Noteks and endured years of torment before dying in 1994. Her body was burned to destroy evidence. Shane Watson, a relative, was shot by David and his body cremated in 1994. Ron Woodworth suffered horrific treatment before dying in 2003. His body was buried on the property. Shelley developed elaborate punishment rituals that included forcing victims into degrading positions for hours. She called this wallowing. Victims were kept in near starvation conditions. They were subjected to scalding water. When Ron Woodworth developed sores, Shelley poured bleach on the wounds. She forced victims to drink their own urine. How did they hide these horrors for so long? David participated directly in some instances and helped dispose of bodies in others. The couple relied on isolating their victims and destroying evidence. They burned bodies in their wood stove or buried them. They moved frequently to avoid suspicion, but they could not control everyone. Shelley's own daughters lived in the household and witnessed the treatment of the house guests. They lived in fear themselves, understanding that they too could become targets if they spoke out. As they grew older and gained independence, they struggled with whether to report what they had seen. In 2003, Shelley's daughters finally went to police with their accounts of what had happened in the household over the years. The investigation began immediately. Forensic evidence was limited because of the body destruction, but autopsy results confirmed Ron Woodworth had been the victim of sustained harm. Both Shelley and David were arrested and charged with multiple counts related to the deaths and treatment of their victims. Faced with overwhelming testimony from their daughters and physical evidence where it existed, both accepted plea deals to avoid trial. Shelley pleaded guilty to second-degree offense and manslaughter charges. She was sentenced to 22 years in prison. David pleaded guilty to second-degree offense and received 15 years. David was released on parole in 2016 after serving his sentence. He has expressed seeking forgiveness for his role in the crimes. Shelley Notek was released in November 2022. However, as of 2025 to 2026, she has reportedly relocated to Oregon to live with a relative, moving away from the Raymond and South Bend area of Washington where her crimes occurred. But the story does not end with their releases. Shelley's daughters have publicly warned that they believe their mother remains dangerous. They have stated that she has not changed fundamentally and that she poses a continued threat. Experts who evaluated Shelley noted what they described as traits consistent with individuals who derive satisfaction from causing suffering to others. The Notek case revealed how predators can hide in plain sight by targeting the most vulnerable members of society. Their victims were people without strong support systems, people who had turned to the no-techs for help in difficult times. The very kindness that made the victims accept help from the no-techs made them perfect targets for exploitation and harm. The case also highlighted the difficult position of witnesses, particularly when those witnesses are family members who fear becoming victims themselves. The daughter's eventual decision to come forward ended the no-tech's ability to harm others. But it came after years of suffering for multiple victims. Some predators target strangers with meticulous planning. Israel Keyes. Israel Keyes grew up in a fundamentalist family living off-grid in Washington state. His childhood was marked by isolation from mainstream society. The family practiced extreme religious beliefs and lived in remote areas. This isolation shaped Keyes in ways that would become clear only much later. As a young person, Keyes displayed troubling behaviors. He engaged in harming animals and stealing firearms from neighbors. These early warning signs went unaddressed in the isolated environment where he was raised. As a teenager, Keyes rejected his family's religious beliefs entirely. He became an atheist and expressed interest in beliefs that alarmed his family. This ideological shift led to conflicts that eventually resulted in his family asking him to leave. He joined the military in 1998 and served until 2001. The military experience may have refined skills that he would later use for sinister purposes. After leaving the military, Keyes settled in Alaska, where he worked as a contractor and started a family. To outward appearances, he was a skilled tradesman and devoted father. But Keyes was living a double life that no one around him suspected. Keyes was methodical in his planning. He traveled extensively for work, and during these trips, he buried what he called murder kits across the country. These caches contained weapons, tools, and cash. He would return to these locations when he was ready to commit offenses, using the pre-positioned supplies to avoid leaving traceable evidence through purchases. His approach was different from many offenders. He did not target a specific type of victim or operate in a specific geographic area. He deliberately chose victims randomly to avoid creating patterns that investigators could identify. He traveled far from home to commit his offenses, then returned to his normal life in Alaska. FBI investigations later confirmed at least 3 victims, though Keyes himself claimed responsibility for more. In 2011, he entered a home in Vermont and harmed Bill and Lorraine Currier. Their bodies were never recovered. In 2012, he abducted Samantha Koenig from her workplace in Anchorage, Alaska. He held her for ransom, then took her life and disposed of her body. What ultimately led to his capture was an uncharacteristic mistake. After taking Samantha Koenig's life, Keyes used her debit card. The electronic trail from those transactions allowed investigators to track his movements. He was arrested in Texas in March 2012. Once in custody, Keyes agreed to lengthy interviews with FBI agents. Over 40 hours of conversations were recorded. He provided disturbing details about his methods and mindset. He described his actions as producing a rush, like a high, and stated bluntly, "I don't feel bad," about what he had done. During these interviews, Keyes refused to provide specific details about all his victims. He treated the interviews as a game, providing just enough information to keep investigators interested but withholding crucial details. Forensic evidence supported some of his claims. Investigators recovered several of his buried murder kits from locations he described. DNA evidence linked him conclusively to confirmed victims, but many questions remained unanswered. Before he could go to trial, Keyes took his own life in his jail cell in December 2012. He left behind writings that provided some additional insights into his thinking, but raised more questions than they answered. Investigators discovered 11 skulls drawn in his own blood and ink in his jail cell after his suicide on December 2, 2012. His death meant that families of potential victims would never know for certain whether their missing loved ones had encountered Keyes. The FBI continues to investigate cases that may be connected to him, hoping to provide closure to families, even though Keyes himself can no longer be questioned. The Keyes case demonstrated how someone could evade detection for years by avoiding patterns and planning meticulously. His deliberate randomness made him nearly impossible to track using traditional investigative methods. Only his financial mistake with the debit card provided the break investigators needed. The next case involves a location specifically designed for suffering: the Toy Box Killer. David Parker Ray was born in 1939 in New Mexico. He had a troubled upbringing marked by instability and reported experiences that shaped his later behavior. As an adult, he worked as a mechanic for the New Mexico Parks Department, a job that gave him a stable income and community standing. But Ray harbored interests that he kept hidden from his employers and most acquaintances. Beginning sometime in the 1990s, he began acquiring equipment and constructing what he called his toy box, a soundproof trailer on his property specifically outfitted for holding and torturing victims. The trailer contained restraints, medical equipment, and various implements designed to cause suffering. Ray installed mirrors so victims would be forced to witness their own suffering. He created an audio recording that played for victims when they regained consciousness, describing in graphic detail what he planned to do to them and informing them that they would not survive to tell anyone. Ray's method involved abducting women, often targeting individuals involved in the street economy who might not be immediately reported missing. He drugged his victims before bringing them to the trailer. Once inside, they endured days or weeks of systematic torture. Ray used memory-altering substances in an attempt to ensure that any victims he released would not remember enough to identify him or describe what happened. For years, Ray operated without detection. He was aided by accomplices, including his girlfriend Cindy Hendy and daughter Glenda Jessie Ray. They helped him identify, abduct, and handle victims. The drugs and isolated location meant that even if victims escaped or were released, they often could not provide coherent accounts to authorities. How many victims were there? This remains unknown. Ray claimed to investigators that he had taken dozens of victims over the years. No bodies were ever found, leading to debate about whether he actually took lives or primarily focused on torture. The use of memory-disrupting substances meant that many potential victims may not even remember what happened to them. Ray's operation ended in March 1999 when a victim escaped. Cynthia Vigil managed to free herself while Cindy Hendy was distracted. She fled the property wearing only a metal collar and chain. She flagged down a passing vehicle and was taken to authorities. Her account led police immediately to Ray's property. When officers searched the trailer, they found extensive evidence of what had occurred there. The recordings Ray had made were particularly damning, as they detailed his intentions in his own voice. Ray was arrested and charged with numerous offenses related to the torture and holding of victims. During his trial, the audio recordings were played for the jury. In one recording, Ray's voice states, "You're gonna see me as one cranky motherfucker," as he describes what victims can expect. David Parker Ray was sentenced to 223 years in prison. Furthermore, he was never actually convicted of murder, as no bodies were ever recovered. He was convicted of kidnapping and torture. Cindy Hendy received a 36-year sentence for her role. Jessie Ray received sentences for her participation, but justice was abbreviated. David Parker Ray died of a heart attack in 2002, less than 2 years into his sentence. He took to his grave the true extent of his activities and the fates of his victims. The case left investigators with haunting questions. Scattered belongings of unidentified women found on Ray's property suggested victims whose identities remain unknown. Families of missing women from that time and region wondered whether their loved ones had encountered Ray. The Toy Box Killer case revealed how someone with mechanical skills and planning could create a space specifically designed for harm, operating in plain sight as a regular community member. Across the ocean, Another case involved a completely different motive. Leonarda Cianciulli. Leonarda Cianciulli was born in 1894 in Montella, Italy. Her early life was marked by difficulties and traumas that seemed to shape her later worldview. She married Raffaele Pansardi and had numerous pregnancies, though many ended in loss. Of 17 reported pregnancies, only 4 offspring survived to adulthood. These losses deeply affected Cianciulli. She became increasingly absorbed in fortune-telling and palmistry. She consulted with fortune tellers herself and became convinced that terrible fates awaited her family unless she took action to prevent them. Her superstitious beliefs intensified when her eldest son was called to fight in World War II. Cianciulli believed she needed to make offerings to protect her son from harm during the war. But her idea of appropriate offerings was horrifying. Between 1939 and 1940, she targeted 3 women who trusted her. Her victims were women she knew personally. Faustina Setti, Francesca Soavi, and Virginia Cacioppo all consulted with Cianciulli for fortune-telling services. She gained their trust and convinced each of them separately that she had found wonderful opportunities for them, requiring them to travel. She drugged each victim, then struck them with an axe. She dismembered the bodies and disposed of them in a grotesque manner. She boiled the remains and turned the mixture into soap. She claimed to use this soap herself. Even more disturbing, she reportedly baked parts of her victims into tea cakes, which she served to visitors and consumed herself. Historians believe this part of her story was an embellishment or a result of her distorted thinking, as there was no independent physical evidence to prove she served the remains to others. In her later memoir, written in prison, she described these processes in unsettling detail. She wrote, "Her flesh was fat and white. I made most acceptable creamy soap," referring to one victim. For a time, Cianciulli successfully concealed what she had done. She forged letters from her victims to their families, making it appear they had indeed traveled to new locations. But Virginia Cacioppo's sister-in-law became suspicious when Virginia failed to return as promised. The sister-in-law knew that Virginia had last been seen visiting Cianciulli. She reported her concerns to police, who began investigating. When questioned, Cianciulli initially denied involvement. But as evidence mounted and inconsistencies in her story became apparent, she eventually confessed to all 3 incidents. Her trial in 1946 became a sensation in Italy. She showed no remorse for her actions, maintaining that she had done what was necessary to protect her son from harm during the war. She viewed her actions through the lens of her superstitious beliefs, rather than acknowledging the moral wrongness of taking lives. She was convicted and sentenced to 30 years in prison and 3 additional years in a criminal asylum. The authorities determined that she was not legally insane, but recognized that her thinking was severely distorted. Cianciulli served her sentence and wrote a memoir detailing her life and crimes. She died in 1970 at the criminal asylum in Pozzuoli. Her case demonstrated how superstitious beliefs combined with personal trauma can create a dangerous mindset. Her willingness to harm others to achieve what she believed was a protective purpose made her particularly dangerous to those who trusted her. The next case involves someone whose distorted thinking manifested in even more disturbing ways. Albert Fish. Albert Fish was born Hamilton Howard Fish in 1870 in Washington, D.C. His childhood was marked by instability. His father died when he was young, and his mother placed him in an orphanage where he reported experiencing and witnessing troubling treatment. These early experiences seemed to shape Fish's psychological development in severely problematic ways. As he grew older, he married and had 6 offspring. He worked various jobs, including as a painter and handyman. To outward appearances, he seemed like an eccentric but harmless older man. But Fish harbored urges and engaged in behaviors that he kept carefully hidden. He targeted young people, particularly those from vulnerable families. He was suspected of harming numerous victims over several decades, though he was only conclusively linked to a few cases. His confirmed victims included Grace Budd, Francis McDonnell, and Billy Gaffney, all taken during the 1920s and early 1930s. But Fish himself claimed to have harmed a victim in every state, suggesting far more victims than were ever confirmed. Fish's method involved approaching families and gaining their trust. In the case of Grace Budd, he presented himself as a potential employer for her older brother. He convinced the family to let him take Grace to a party. She was never seen alive again by her family. For years, the Budd family had no answers about what happened to Grace. The case went cold despite intensive investigation. But Fish could not resist taunting the family. In 1934, 6 years after Grace's disappearance, Fish sent an anonymous letter to her parents. The letter contained graphic descriptions of what he had done to Grace. It was written to cause maximum suffering to the family. But the letter also proved to be Fish's undoing. Investigators traced the letter through its envelope. The envelope had an emblem from a rooming house. Police canvassed rooming houses until they found one, where Fish had briefly stayed. They tracked him to a residence where he was arrested in December 1934. When arrested, Fish confessed to taking Grace Budd's life and provided details only the perpetrator would know. He admitted to other incidents as well. Psychiatrists evaluated him extensively. They found him to have numerous distortions in his thinking and disturbing practices, but the legal standard for insanity was not met. His trial in 1935 became a media spectacle. The details that emerged were so disturbing that newspapers struggled with how to report them. Fish showed no remorse and seemed to enjoy the attention his trial brought. He was convicted and sentenced to execution. His defense team appealed based on insanity arguments, but the appeals were denied. He was executed in 1936 at Sing Sing prison. Even at his execution, Fish made disturbing statements. He reportedly said that being executed would be the supreme thrill of my life. His case remained one of the most disturbing in American criminal history for the combination of his calculated approach and the depravity of his actions. Some cases involve seemingly random encounters that turn deadly. Oba Chandler. Oba Chandler was born in 1946 in Ohio. He lived a transient life, moving between states and working various jobs. He settled eventually in Florida, where he worked in construction and owned a boat. In June 1989, Joan Rogers and her daughters Michelle and Christ were on vacation in Florida from Ohio. They were unfamiliar with the area and needed directions. They had the misfortune of encountering Chandler, who offered to help them. Chandler wrote out directions for them on a brochure. This seemingly helpful gesture was the beginning of a horrifying sequence of events. Chandler convinced the Rogers family to join him on his boat, ostensibly to show them the sights of Tampa Bay. Once on the boat and away from shore, Chandler's intentions became clear. He bound the victims and harmed them. He then weighted their bodies and pushed them into Tampa Bay. Their bodies were discovered floating in the water on June 4th, 1989. The discovery shocked the Tampa community. A mother and her daughters, on vacation, targeted by someone who had pretended to help them. The investigation began immediately, but initially had few leads. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Authorities had the brochure with handwritten directions that Chandler had given to the Rogers family before they boarded his boat. The handwriting was distinctive. Police released images of the handwriting to the public, hoping someone would recognize it. Oba Chandler's neighbor came forward, stating that the handwriting looked like that of a man she had encountered. That man was Oba Chandler. She herself had been assaulted by Chandler during a boat trip weeks before the Rogers incident, though she had survived. This tip led investigators to Chandler. They obtained handwriting samples from him. Forensic document examiners compared his handwriting to the directions on the brochure. The match was conclusive. Chandler was arrested in September 1992. more than 3 years after the Rogers family had perished. Physical evidence, including rope and other items found on his boat, corroborated the survivor's account and connected him to the Rogers case. During his trial, prosecutors presented the handwriting evidence, survivor testimony, and physical evidence. The jury convicted Chandler on all counts. He was sentenced to execution. Chandler maintained his innocence throughout his years on death row. Even in his final statement before execution in 2011, he stated, "I didn't do it." But the evidence against him was overwhelming. The Chandler case demonstrated how a simple act of asking for directions can turn into a nightmare when the wrong person offers help. It also showed how handwriting analysis, often overlooked in the age of digital forensics, can be the key piece of evidence in solving a case. Marjorie Diehl Armstrong. Marjorie Diehl Armstrong was born in 1949 in Pennsylvania. She was described as highly intelligent but deeply troubled. She had a history of relationships marked by conflict and had been diagnosed with various conditions affecting her mental state. Her criminal history began before the incident that made her nationally known. She had been involved in the passing of at least one former boyfriend, though the circumstances were initially ruled differently. But it was her involvement in a 2003 incident that brought her lasting infamy. On August 28, 2003, Brian Wells walked into a bank in Erie, Pennsylvania, wearing what appeared to be a bomb locked around his neck. He handed a note to the teller demanding money. After leaving the bank with the money, Wells was stopped by police who noticed the device. Wells told officers that he had been forced to rob the bank. He claimed people had put the bomb collar on him and given him instructions to follow. He seemed genuinely terrified. As police called for bomb technicians, the device suddenly detonated, ending Wells' life in front of the officers and news cameras that had arrived on scene. The investigation that followed revealed one of the most bizarre criminal plots in American history. The bomb collar had been real and functional. The plot involved multiple individuals, including Diehl Armstrong. What emerged was a plan to rob the bank using Wells as an unwitting participant. The co-conspirators disagreed on whether Wells knew he was participating in a robbery or was truly an unwitting victim. But the bomb was real, and the co-conspirators had no intention of removing it, regardless of whether Wells succeeded. The investigation into who created the bomb collar and planned the robbery took years. A break came when someone reported information about a body in a freezer. That tip led police to Diehl Armstrong, who had been keeping her boyfriend's body in a freezer after shooting him. As investigators dug deeper, they uncovered Diehl Armstrong's involvement in the collar bomb plot. Her motive appeared to be financial. She wanted money to pay someone to take the life of her own father so she could inherit his estate. The complexity of the case meant it took years to bring to trial. Diehl Armstrong was convicted of conspiracy, robbery, and using a destructive device in the commission of a felony. During the trial, the prosecutor described the plot as motivated by greed and evil. She was sentenced to life in prison plus 30 years. Throughout her trial and imprisonment, questions remained about her mental state and whether it affected her culpability. She maintained versions of events that minimized her role. Diehl Armstrong died in prison in 2017 of natural causes. The collar bomb case remains one of the most unusual and disturbing robberies in FBI history, involving a destructive device, multiple conspirators, and a victim who may or may not have known what he was participating in. If you've made it this far and enjoy deep dives into the most shocking criminal cases, hit that subscribe button and don't forget to press the bell icon. The collar bomb case remains one of the most unusual and disturbing robberies in FBI history, involving a destructive device, multiple conspirators, and a victim who may or may not have known what he was participating in. Josef Fritzl. Josef Fritzl was born in 1935 in Austria. He grew up during World War II and had a difficult relationship with his own mother, who was reportedly harsh and controlling. As an adult, he married Rosemarie, and they had 7 offspring together. To neighbors and acquaintances in the town of Amstetten, the Fritzl family appeared completely normal, living in an ordinary house on an ordinary street. But beneath the house, Fritzl had spent years constructing a hidden space that would become the setting for unimaginable suffering. The basement area was complex, with multiple locked doors and soundproofed rooms. In 1984, when his daughter Elizabeth was 18 years old, Fritzl lured her into the basement under the pretense of needing help installing a door. Once she was inside, he overpowered her and locked her in the concealed rooms he had built over years of secret construction. For the next 24 years, Elizabeth remained imprisoned, the basement with no contact with the outside world. Fritzl subjected her to repeated harm and fathered 7 offspring with her during her captivity. 3 of these offspring remained in the basement with Elizabeth, never seeing daylight or experiencing life outside the confined rooms. The other infants were brought upstairs at various times, where Fritzl claimed to his wife Rosemarie that Elizabeth had abandoned them on the doorstep with notes saying she could not care for them. How did he maintain this elaborate deception for nearly a quarter century without anyone discovering the truth? Fritzl was extremely methodical in his planning and execution. The basement rooms were carefully soundproofed and hidden behind multiple locked doors that only he had keys to access. He told his wife Rosemarie that Elizabeth had run away to join a religious group and wanted nothing to do with the family anymore. He even forged letters supposedly from Elizabeth over the years to support this fabricated story and prevent anyone from searching for her. The basement where Elizabeth and her 3 offspring lived was cramped, dark, and barely suitable for human habitation. There was minimal ventilation and no natural light ever reached the rooms. Fritzl controlled all access to food, supplies, and any medical care. Elizabeth and the offspring lived in constant fear and total isolation, never knowing if or when Fritzl would appear. Rosemarie claimed throughout the investigation and trial that she had absolutely no knowledge of what was happening in the basement beneath their home. She stated that she accepted Fritzl's explanations about Elizabeth's disappearance and the sudden appearance of infants she was told to raise as her own. Whether she truly knew nothing or chose not to question obvious inconsistencies in Fritzl's stories remains a subject of debate among investigators and the public. The situation finally came to light in April 2008 due to a medical emergency that could not be ignored. One of the offspring who had lived their entire life in the basement, Kirsten, who was then 19 years old, became seriously and mysteriously ill. Elizabeth pleaded desperately with Fritzl to get medical help for Kirsten. He finally agreed and brought Kirsten to the hospital, but claimed not to know where her mother Elizabeth was or how to contact her. Hospital staff immediately became suspicious of Fritzl's story and the condition of the young woman. They made urgent public appeals for the mother to come forward because Kirsten needed medical history information to treat her properly. Police became involved in trying to locate the missing mother, treating it as a potential criminal matter. Under increasing pressure from authorities who were investigating Elizabeth's whereabouts, Fritzl finally allowed Elizabeth to leave the basement to visit Kirsten at the hospital. Once out of his immediate control, and in the presence of hospital staff and police, Elizabeth told them the horrifying truth about what had happened to her over the past 24 years. The revelation shocked Austria and quickly became international news. Police immediately arrested Fritzl and obtained warrants to search the property thoroughly. They found the hidden basement rooms exactly as Elizabeth had described them. The conditions were deplorable and disturbing. The offspring who had lived their entire lives underground were pale and severely malnourished, having never seen sunlight or experienced normal human interaction outside their confined family unit. Fritzl was charged with numerous serious offenses, including imprisonment, harm, and other crimes spanning decades. During the initial investigation, he denied everything and claimed Elizabeth's story was fabricated. But when confronted with Elizabeth's detailed testimony, the physical evidence from the basement and testimony from the offspring, his denials became impossible to maintain in the face of overwhelming proof. His trial in March 2009 became an international media event, with reporters from around the world descending on the Austrian courthouse. The details that emerged during testimony were so profoundly disturbing that the judge ordered portions of the trial closed to the public and press to protect the dignity of the victims. After hearing the evidence, Fritzl changed his plea to guilty on all charges. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with required psychiatric care. The judge made clear that Fritzl posed a continuing danger to society and ordered that he remain imprisoned indefinitely with no possibility of release. In early 2024, an Austrian court ruled that Fritzl could be moved from the unit for the criminally insane to a standard prison facility. This decision was based on medical reports stating that his advanced dementia and physical frailty meant he no longer posed a threat to the public. Elizabeth and her 6 offspring who survived have received extensive therapy and support services. Austrian authorities provided them with new identities to protect their privacy as they attempt to rebuild their lives away from media attention. The offspring, who were raised upstairs by Rosemarie, had to cope with the traumatic experience of learning the truth about their family and their sister, who had been imprisoned beneath their feet. In 2023, reports emerged that Fritzl had written a book from prison attempting to reconcile with his family and present his perspective on events. The family firmly rejected his overtures and wanted nothing to do with him. He remains imprisoned, with absolutely no prospect of ever being released. The Fritzl case revealed how abuse can remain hidden even in plain sight when perpetrators exploit familial power and take advantage of social reluctance to question private family matters. It also demonstrated the remarkable resilience of survivors who endured decades of captivity and emerged to reclaim their lives. Some cases involve relationships that turn deadly in unexpected ways. Sarah Boone and Jorge Torres lived together in Winter Park, Florida. Their relationship was marked by ongoing conflicts and documented issues, with both partners having histories of concerning behavior toward each other. Law enforcement had been called to their residence multiple times over the years for incidents involving both of them. In February 2020, their troubled relationship ended in tragedy under circumstances that would shock investigators. On February 23, 2020, Boone and Torres were drinking together at their residence. According to Boone's initial account to police when she called 911 the next morning, they had decided to play a game of hide-and-seek while intoxicated. She claimed that Torres willingly climbed into a large suitcase as part of the game, thinking it would be amusing. Boone told investigators that she zipped the suitcase closed with Torres inside as part of what she portrayed as innocent fun between a couple. She then claimed she went upstairs to their bedroom and fell asleep, completely forgetting that Torres was confined in the suitcase downstairs. When she woke the next morning and came downstairs, she said she unzipped the suitcase and found Torres unresponsive and not breathing. But this account of an accidental tragedy quickly unraveled when investigators examined Boone's cell phone as part of their standard investigation. On her phone, police found multiple videos that Boone herself had recorded during the incident. The videos told a completely different story than the one she had given to police in her initial statements. The videos showed Torres trapped inside the zipped suitcase, clearly in severe distress and struggling. He could be heard desperately calling out Boone's name repeatedly and saying he could not breathe properly. He begged her to unzip the suitcase and let him out. On the videos, Boone's voice could be heard responding to his increasingly frantic pleas. Instead of immediately unzipping the suitcase and releasing him, she taunted him and made dismissive comments. In the videos, Boone made statements suggesting this was deliberate retaliation for past incidents between them in their volatile relationship. She told Torres that this was exactly how she felt during previous altercations they had experienced. She did not sound like someone playing an innocent game that had gone wrong. She sounded like someone deliberately inflicting punishment and suffering on another person. The videos were absolutely the central piece of evidence in the case against Boone. They showed clearly that Torres had not died from an innocent game that accidentally went wrong, as Boone had claimed. They showed that Boone had kept him zipped in the suitcase while he visibly and audibly struggled to breathe, that she was fully aware of his distress and suffering, and that she consciously chose not to release him despite his desperate pleas. Investigators determined through autopsy that Torres had suffocated inside the suitcase. The medical examiner found that his cause of passing was entirely consistent with being confined in the small enclosed space without adequate air circulation for an extended period. The videos showed that this confinement had been prolonged and deliberate rather than accidental. Boone was arrested and charged with second-degree offense. As her case proceeded through the courts, she went through multiple defense attorneys. Each attorney eventually withdrew from representing her or was dismissed by her, causing significant delays in the legal proceedings. Reports suggested difficulties in the attorney-client relationships and disagreements about defense strategy. During her years awaiting trial, Boone gave several interviews from jail and made public statements that often seemed to work against her own defense. She appeared to lack full understanding or appreciation of how serious her legal situation was. She made comments to media that suggested she still viewed Torres as deserving of what happened to him because of their relationship history. Her trial finally proceeded in October 2024, more than 4 years after Torres's passing. The prosecution presented the videos as the absolute centerpiece of their case against her. The defense argued that Boone had not specifically intended to cause Torres's death, that she had been significantly affected by substances during the incident, and that their mutual relationship history showed a pattern of conflict from both partners. But the videos proved to be devastating evidence that the defense could not overcome. The jury could directly hear Torres begging repeatedly to be released. They could hear Boone's responses showing she understood his distress. The defense struggled to provide any reasonable explanation for why Boone had not immediately unzipped the suitcase when Torres first said he could not breathe if this was truly just an innocent game. The jury convicted Boone of second-degree offense after deliberating on the evidence. On December 2, 2024, Sarah Boone was sentenced to life in prison for the second-degree murder of Jorge Torres, Jr. While Florida has effectively abolished parole for most modern violent crimes, the legal term for her conviction is simply life, and she remains incarcerated as of 2026. She was transferred to a Florida correctional facility to serve her sentence in late 2024. The Boone case demonstrated powerfully how modern technology can provide absolutely irrefutable evidence of what occurred during a crime. The videos she recorded herself became the proof of her actions and state of mind that no testimony or argument could contradict. The case also showed how conflicts in relationships can escalate to fatal consequences when one person chooses to inflict suffering rather than simply end the relationship. Other cases involve individuals whose distorted perceptions of reality drove them to horrifying acts. Richard Chase. Richard Chase was born in 1950 in California. His childhood showed early warning signs of serious psychological issues that would intensify over time. He harmed animals from a young age and displayed troubling behaviors that deeply concerned those around him, including family members and teachers. As he grew older and entered adolescence and young adulthood, his grip on reality became increasingly tenuous and his behavior more erratic. Chase developed bizarre beliefs that were completely disconnected from reality and grew more elaborate over time. He became utterly convinced that his blood was turning to powder inside his body and that he needed to drink blood to prevent himself from dying. This delusion became an obsession that drove him to increasingly disturbing actions that escalated in severity. Initially, Chase attempted to satisfy his delusional need by capturing and harming animals, including dogs, cats, and rabbits. He would consume their blood raw, believing it was necessary for his survival. Neighbors reported seeing him with blood on his clothing and behaving strangely. But his delusions intensified beyond what animal blood could satisfy, and he came to believe he specifically needed human blood. In late December 1977 and throughout January 1978, Chase committed a series of attacks in Sacramento, California that shocked the community. His first confirmed victim was Ambrose Griffin, an engineer who was shot during what appeared to be a random drive-by shooting in late December. Days later, on January 23rd, Chase broke into the home of Teresa Wallin, who was 3 months pregnant. He harmed her and engaged in disturbing acts involving her blood and body. On January 27, 1978, Chase entered the home of Evelyn Miroth while she was babysitting. He took the lives of Evelyn, her friend Danny Meredith, who had stopped by, and her young offspring. He also harmed Evelyn's nephew, who was visiting the home. The scene was absolutely horrific, with extensive evidence of Chase's consumption of blood and desecration of the bodies. How did investigators connect these seemingly random incidents to Chase? Physical evidence played an absolutely crucial role in identifying him. Chase had left clear fingerprints at the Miroth home that could be matched to prints on file. He had also taken items from the residence, including Evelyn's car, which was found abandoned nearby with additional evidence inside. Neighbors in Chase's apartment building had filed multiple complaints about disturbing observations. They reported seeing him bringing animals to his residence and hearing disturbing sounds coming from his unit. Some had witnessed him with blood visibly on his clothing on multiple occasions. When police interviewed people in the neighborhood near the Miroth home after the attacks there, multiple witnesses described seeing a man matching Chase's description, acting suspiciously near the property around the time of the incident. Police arrested Chase on January 27, 1978, the same day as the Miroth incident, after witnesses helped identify him. When they searched his apartment with a warrant, they found absolutely overwhelming evidence of his activities. There was blood spattered throughout the residence on walls and furniture. He had body parts stored in his refrigerator. He had multiple blenders that contained mixtures of blood and tissue. The evidence made horrifyingly clear the full extent of his actions and his consumption of blood. Chase showed absolutely no remorse or even basic understanding that he had done anything morally or legally wrong when questioned by investigators. His delusions were so profound and all-consuming that he genuinely believed his actions were necessary for his own survival. He told investigators in detail about his belief that his blood was literally turning to powder and that consuming blood was the only way to prevent his own imminent death from this condition. Psychiatrists evaluated Chase extensively before and during his trial. They diagnosed him with serious mental health conditions, including paranoid schizophrenia. However, the legal standard for insanity at the time required that a defendant not know right from wrong in a basic sense. Chase understood intellectually that society viewed his actions as wrong, even though he believed in his delusional system that they were necessary for survival. Chase was tried and convicted of 6 counts of first-degree offense. The jury rejected the insanity defense after hearing psychiatric testimony. He was sentenced to death and sent to San Quentin State Prison to await execution. While on death row, Chase remained deeply disturbed and his delusions persisted. Other inmates feared him intensely due to his bizarre behavior and horrific history. He took his own life in December 1980 by overdosing on psychiatric medications he had been prescribed and had been saving up over time rather than taking as directed. The Chase case raised difficult and continuing questions about mental illness and criminal responsibility. His delusions were genuine, severe, and well documented by mental health professionals. Yet he was found legally sane enough to be convicted and sentenced to death. Some cases involve partnerships where 2 people enable and encourage each other's worst impulses. Fred and Rose West. Fred West was born in 1941 in Herefordshire, England. He came from a troubled background and showed problematic behaviors from a young age. Rose was born in 1953 in Devon, England, also from a difficult family situation. When they met, Fred was significantly older than Rose, and their relationship quickly became characterized by concerning dynamics. Fred and Rose married in 1972 and lived at various addresses in Gloucester, England, before settling at 25 Cromwell Street. This address would become infamous as the location where numerous victims were harmed and buried. The West's offenses spanned from 1967 to 1987, a period of 20 years. They are known to have taken at least 12 lives, though investigators suspect there may have been more victims whose remains were never found. Their victims included young women and girls whom they abducted, held captive, and subjected to sustained harm before ending their lives. Horrifyingly, some of their victims were members of their own family. Fred's first wife and his daughter from that marriage were among those who disappeared and were later found to have been victims. The Wests had numerous offspring together. Some of these offspring were subjected to harm within the household. The atmosphere in the house was one of fear and control. The offspring who survived to adulthood have spoken about the terror of growing up in that environment. How did the Wests evade detection for so long? They targeted vulnerable individuals who might not be immediately reported missing. They buried bodies on their own property, including in the basement and garden of 25 Cromwell Street. They maintained an outward appearance of normalcy to neighbors. The case began to unravel in 1992 when one of their offspring spoke to police about the treatment in the household. This led to an investigation into the family. Initially, Fred and Rose were questioned about the well-being of their offspring, but the investigation soon expanded. Police obtained a warrant to search 25 Cromwell Street. In February 1994, they began excavating the property. What they found was shocking even to experienced investigators. Bodies were buried in the basement, under the patio, and in the garden. The victims had been dismembered before burial. As more remains were discovered, the scale of the West's offenses became clear. Fred was arrested and confessed to the incidents, though he attempted to shield Rose from blame, claiming he had acted alone. But evidence and testimony from survivors indicated Rose had been an active participant. Fred took his own life in prison on January 1, 1995, before his trial could proceed. This meant that many questions about the full extent of their offenses and the fates of potential other victims would never be answered. Rose was tried separately. She was convicted on 10 counts and sentenced to life imprisonment. The judge ordered that she should never be released. She continues to maintain her innocence despite overwhelming evidence. A recent documentary examined the case, providing new insights into how the Wests were able to commit such acts for so long. The case remains one of the most disturbing in British criminal history. The house at 25 Cromwell Street was demolished in 1996. A pathway now marks the location. The case highlighted how abuse can occur within families over extended periods when perpetrators exploit power dynamics and social reluctance to intervene in private family matters. Some cases from decades past continue to fascinate because of their particularly disturbing nature. Dean Corll and Elmer Wayne Henley. Dean Corll was born in 1939 in Fort Wayne, Indiana. He eventually moved to Houston, Texas, where he worked in his family's candy manufacturing business, earning him the nickname the Candy Man among neighborhood youngsters. He appeared to be a friendly, generous man who gave candy freely to young people in the area. But behind this carefully cultivated facade, Corll harbored terrible urges that he would act upon. Elmer Wayne Henley was born in 1956 in Houston. He was just a teenager from a troubled background when he became involved with Corll. Henley met Corll through mutual acquaintances, and Corll quickly recognized opportunities to exploit the young man's difficult circumstances. Their relationship would result in one of the most disturbing series of incidents in American criminal history. Beginning around 1970, Corll began systematically targeting young males in the Houston area, particularly those from vulnerable backgrounds. He lured them to his residence with promises of parties, access to substances, or other enticements that appealed to teenagers. Once inside his home, he would subdue them through various means and subject them to terrible treatment before ending their lives. He developed a methodology that allowed him to continue these acts for years. Corll recruited Henley and another teenager named David Brooks to help him find and lure victims to his residence. Henley later claimed during his confession that Coral paid him $200 for each victim he successfully brought to the house. The teenagers brought their own friends and acquaintances to Coral, many of them not initially understanding what would happen to these young people once Coral had them in his control. Over a period of approximately 3 years, from 1970 to 1973, Coral took the lives of at least 28 young males. The actual number may be considerably higher, as not all potential victims were ever identified, and some families never reported their missing sons to authorities. Coral buried bodies in various locations he had access to, including a boat shed he rented, a beach area, and other sites around the Houston region. The community and families noticed that young males were going missing with disturbing frequency. But many families initially assumed their sons had simply run away from home, which was common during that era. The scale of what was happening was not recognized because the victims came from different neighborhoods, different schools, and different social circles. There was no immediately apparent pattern that would alert authorities to a serial offender operating in their midst. The horrifying situation ended abruptly and violently on August 8, 1973. Henley brought 2 friends to Coral's residence that night, a male friend and a female friend. Coral became absolutely enraged that Henley had brought a female to his residence, breaking an unspoken rule about his victims. A confrontation ensued during which Coral threatened all 3 teenagers with a firearm and began restraining them. During the struggle, Henley managed to get control of Coral's firearm and shot him 6 times, ending his life. After Coral's passing, Henley called police and made a full confession to his role in the offenses. He led investigators to the various locations where bodies were buried, beginning the grim process of recovering victims. The excavation of burial sites became a process that horrified Houston and captured national attention. Bodies were systematically recovered from the boat shed and other locations that Henley and Brooks identified during their confessions and cooperation. The final confirmed victim count of 28 made it the worst case of serial offending in American history at that time, surpassing previous records. During lengthy interrogation, Henley provided extensive and disturbing details about Coral's methods and the fates of specific victims he could remember. He expressed some remorse for his role, but also attempted to minimize his own culpability by portraying himself as another victim of Coral who had been manipulated, threatened, and coerced into participation. The question of how much responsibility Henley and Brooks bore versus how much they had been victimized by Coral became absolutely central to their trials. Brooks was also arrested and provided additional information to investigators during his own interrogation. Both teenagers were charged as accomplices to the incidents. The legal question of their culpability was complex given their ages and Coral's manipulation. Henley was convicted of 6 offenses and sentenced to 6 consecutive 99-year terms, totaling 594 years. Brooks was convicted of 1 offense and also received a lengthy sentence. Elmer Wayne Henley remains imprisoned, but David Brooks died in prison in May 2020 at the age of 65 due to complications from COVID-19. The Coral case revealed how a predator can operate by exploiting teenagers as accomplices, using money and manipulation to overcome their moral resistance to participating in terrible acts. This was all from our side today. Thanks for watching. Click here to check out another video.